Hello, it is Sundas, the 15th of Hearthfire, the year 582. I will be continuing my series by reading a handful of Apocrypha and Necrom books for today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Today we'll be reading Ciphers of the Eye, Denizens of Apocrypha, The Littlest Tomeshell, What is an Arcanist, Part 1 and 2, and What About Glyphics? Ciphers of the Eye by Laramel the Wise. At one point in my rise through academia, Hermaeus Mora, the one who knows, offered me a unique opportunity. The Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge proposed that I come to his oblivion realm of Apocrypha and become one of the Ciphers of the Eye. This was my first real encounter with the one who knows, and my first glimpse at the untold secrets recorded in Apocrypha. As tempting as the offer was to a dedicated scholar and researcher, I decided to decline. I wanted to learn more about Apocrypha and the ciphers through my own efforts, and that research later assisted me when I did enter into my unique arrangement with Hermaeus Mora. The ciphers of the Eye consist of mortals from Nirn, personally selected and invited to Apocrypha by Hermaeus Mora. They become the caretakers and curators for the vast amount of knowledge that constantly rains down upon the realm from the rest of reality. No one knows why Mora decided to entrust mortals with this mountainous task, but soon the ciphers grew from just a few to a small army of catalogers, researchers, and librarians. They created the settlement of Ciphers Midden, and established a headquarters of sorts for their members. In addition to their self-regulated duties sorting through the ever-changing stacks and volumes that form hills and canyons across Apocrypha's landscape, the ciphers offer hospitality and refuge to mortals who arrive in the realm. Whether purposefully or by accident, Ciphers Midden is both a shelter and a place of learning in what can be a hostile and unrelenting land. Each cipher has their own area of expertise and their own approach to the work that they do. Sometimes they seem as disorganized and random as the great stacks that sort, but Apocrypha could not function as it does without them. Denizens of Apocrypha by Cypher Plautus. Apocrypha is, of course, a plane of oblivion. Few natural creatures reside in such places. We mortal ciphers are but visitors in a world of Daedric beings. Some are minor spirits that take forms not dissimilar from the creatures of Nirn, while others resemble the thinking races, and some take on bizarre forms not found in the natural world. Daedric vermin. Spend an hour strolling about Cypher's Midden and you'll encounter everyday vermin that are similar to the pests of the mortal world. At first glance, anyway, Daedrats and Fiendrots appear to exist in all corners of Oblivion, scuttling about and scavenging in much the same way that rats and insects plague Nirn. One type of Daedric vermin unique to Apocrypha is the Tomeshell. It occupies and animates discarded books, much like some crabs borrow the shells of other creatures. Tomeshells are mostly harmless, but can lash out if threatened, and don't get me started on Daed mites. Lesser Daedra. Many of the so-called Lesser Daedra can be found throughout the Endless Library in Chroma Incognito. Every Daedric prince commands legions of imps, Clanfear, and Ogrim. Hermaeus Mora is no exception. However, the Great Eye pays little attention to these creatures. They are simply herded or gathered in places that Mora once guarded, then left to their own devices. Mortal visitors must take great care with any such Daedra they meet at Apocrypha. These lesser Daedra often mistake loyal worshippers of the Great Eye for intruders and set upon them. The Great Eye's servants. While Hermaeus Mora generally ignores bestial Daedra, the more intelligent varieties are of much more interest to him. He frequently employs watchlings as messengers and recorders, tasking them with obscure clerical duties in the hidden bureaucracy that quietly administers Apocrypha. Their larger and more powerful cousins, the Watchers, are often found as overseers and guardians tending to the Great Eye's more important concerns. Two types of Daedra unique to Apocrypha deserve special mention among Hermaeus Mora's servants. Seekers are the scholars of Mora's realm. Of all the Daedra in this plane, they seem the most attuned to the Great Eye's hidden purposes. They are keepers of secrets and the scribes of fate, going about their inscrutable duties in eerie silence. The terrifying fish-like lurkers, on the other hand, embody the Great Eye's ancient connection to the sea. They are Mora's most powerful guardians, existing only to destroy threats to Apocrypha in whatever form they appear. Interlopers. Travel far enough in Apocrypha and you are likely to encounter creatures not native to the plane who have become entrapped here. The best example are the Hushed. Once they were mortal scribes, much like ciphers of the Cipher's Midden, but they have been consumed by knowledge, losing their very identities in their hunger to know more. Most Hushed ignore mortals who encounter them, but sometimes Hermaeus Mora uses these hapless creatures to guard locations he wishes to keep private. Do not interfere with the Hushed, as they attend to their duties, or they may turn on you with no warning at all. The Littlest Tomeshell, a truish story by Cypher Murkish. There once was a Daedric spirit floating through the ever-fluvium of oblivion. It had no realm to call its own, no prince to command it, no form to inhabit. It had nothing but a name, Torgu, and a desire to drift wherever the planar currents carried it. Eventually, as happens to all things, Torgu was drawn into the realm of knowledge and secrets, Apocrypha. The mountains of books that stretched in all directions fascinated the spirit. It had never seen so many tomes of all descriptions stacked so high or wide. As it drifted among the volumes, it tried to imagine the information contained in each. It conjured up visions of distant places, powerful beings, and wondrous relics. But without physical form, Torgu could not turn a page or open a cover to read even a single word. Feeling dejected, it took Torgu a long time to realize there was a commotion happening nearby. The spirit followed the shouts and the roars and the cry of pain until it drifted into a dead end where two mountains of books converged. Trapped with their back to the wall of volumes was a young cipher, new to the ways and dangers of the realm. Over him loomed a Dremnakin, standing on four stout legs, its maw dripping with sharp, pointed fangs. The young cipher held the only object he carried before him as a shield. It was a tiny book, its cover no larger than the palm of his hand and maybe half again as thick. They say that words are sharper than blades, but as a weapon this tiny book left much to be desired, and it didn't give the Dremnakin even a moment's pause. As the great creature reared up to strike, Torgu rushed forward and slid into the tiny book. A spirit let itself fill every corner of the little tome, turning the pages into its body and the covers into its wings. Torgu occupied the little tome the way a mud crab occupies its shell. Then it flapped furiously, rising into the air to impose itself between the Dremnakin and the cipher. Confused, the Dremnakin stared at the flapping, hovering little book. It clearly didn't know what to make of this very unbook-like behavior. With a sudden burst of speed, Torgu flew straight into the Dremnakin's snout. The great creature yelped, more in surprise than pain. But the action was enough. The Dremnakin turned away and fled, disappearing around a bend in the unending wall of books. The young cipher thanked the newly born Tomeshell, for that is what such spirit-possessed books are called in Apocrypha. With a waggle and a flap, Torgu seemed to acknowledge the gratitude. Then it flew off, ready to do whatever Tomeshells do. As for the young cipher, he went on to become an older and wiser cipher, who may or may not be me. What's an Arcanist? Part 1. By Gabriele Bonelli, written for the University of Gwilym, Monthly Arcanum Circular. What in all the realms of oblivion is an Arcanist? I've been asked this question by no fewer than a dozen students and half as many professors, and I desperately wish I could give you an answer that wouldn't make you think I was pulling your leg. So let's start with the basics and work our way out from there. Nice and easy, like extra frosting on a sweet roll. Systemized thaumaturgy. Let's start with a brief aside on organizational arcanum. If, like me, you've had the chance to talk to a number of adventurers in the last several years, no doubt you've heard terms thrown about that made you wonder if you missed a university flyer or two. Templar, Warden, Nightblade, fancy titles that in the end mean precious little to the educator on the ground. In an era when any kind of agreement on what magic is seemed damn near impossible, why are these terms relevant at all? Well, that's the point, isn't it? You need only look to the free-form nature of arcane thought that rules the day to see how tempting, how seductive any kind of compartmentalization at all can be. You need only look to a recent interview with fellow Mages Guild member Dulev when trying to talk about what a warden is to see how rife with potential these titles can be for a learned citizen of the world. As an aside, I would invite readers to revisit my quote-unquote Schools of Magic proposal, based on my time at the Shadowstuhler Academy in Dashan, while this ever-growing stack of rejection letters from Venice Galarian likely means he still sees no interest in the subject, perhaps one of you will. Tomes of Erudition and Opportunity. Now that I've couched my answer sufficiently, I'll attempt to directly answer the question as best as I can tell. An Arcanist is a spellcaster who makes use of arcane spell forms learned from and driven by a mystic tome touched by the power of Apocrypha. As most learned members of the university are aware, quote-unquote oblivion realms exist as much as points along a spectrum or specific or constrained physical localities. We know from extensive documentation that creatures, spellwork, and even mortal beings transported to oblivion realms will conform or change due to the influence of a Daedric prince within their principality. In the case of Apocrypha, the metaphor imposed, by Hermaeus Mora is that of a grand and sweeping library. And so it makes sense that as beings entering a realm can shift to fit it, so too does a part of a realm exiting comport itself to fit the mystical metaphor in which it finds itself. That is to say, it is my hypothesis these quote-unquote books are the craft of Apocrypha itself, oblivion substrate shaken loose and given a home on Nirn, and crucially, in a mortal's mind. What's an Arcanist? Part 2, by Gabriele Bonelli, written for the University of Gwilym, Monthly Arcanum Circular. Currents of the Abyssal Sea. So, what do Arcanists do? Well, just as Doolittle struggled to explain what a warden is, so too am I hard-pressed to categorize these spellcasters. I'll try to paint with a broad brush, and apologies in advance if I splash you. Arcanist spellcasting makes use of several potent metaphors, each of which seems to result in extremely powerful workings. While all mages use runes of varying kinds, the rune work utilized by Arcanists is elaborate in the extreme. These rune forms allow for powerful beam projections, near impenetrable spell armor matrices, and, I'll use the word quote-unquote inventive, restorative magics with a variety of possible outcomes. Runes and language seem to be the core conceit of Arcanist thaumatological underpinnings. While many of these other metaphors are used variably by individual spellcasters, the idea of scribing a rune on reality seems to shape and shift, its form seems to be universal. Because of the connection to the Scry's realm, it most likely will not surprise readers to learn tentacles play a role in several common spellworks. Offensively, these constructs are highly impressive and highly disturbing. I saw firsthand a self-professed Arcanist make use of quickly summoned tentacles to fend off a horde of undead on the outskirts of Glenumbra, and it's a visual, olfactory, and auditory experience I won't soon forget. Another common metaphor draws from defining characteristic of Apocrypha, the great abyssal sea that dominates a large portion of the realm. Its far shores have never been fully explored by any researcher that I'm aware of, and the depths of its inky waters have likely swallowed more secrets than living memory can imagine. Tides, swells, breakers, and shoals, this extra-Nernian ocean is a powerful source of magic for Arcanists, who seem to have no trouble channeling and shaping its waters to their will. Fate itself is a sharply honed instrument in the Arcanist toolbox. I've seen Arcanists tweak probability around them in clever and interesting ways, an echo of the Fate site said to be held by the Lord of Apocrypha. What to make of all this? While it's tempting to ring the university bells and proclaim a new and potent locus of mystic abilities gaining prominence before our very eyes, as with so many things in our world, I believe the truth is somewhat more complicated. Research into this phenomenon leads me to believe quote-unquote Arcanists have likely been among us for quite some time, though perhaps in different forms or without the catchy appellation. It's worth noting, too, Hermaeus Mora's quote-unquote portfolio among the Daedric princes plays heavily into the mystic metaphors used by these casters, but that's entirely a function of the Arcanist relationship with the Realm of Secrets, not the squid-faced prince himself. In point of fact, several Arcanists I interviewed recently expressed a deep distrust, or even hatred, of the Prince of Knowledge, while others verge on a cultist zeal for the inevitable knower. This is all to say, and Hemriel is, well, it's far more varied and unique than our scholarly papers and neat historical treatises could ever allow for. The Arcanist phenomenon is one that I wanted to draw your attention to and perhaps make you aware of new and exciting metaphor groupings cropping up in your own province or town. What about Glyphics by Cypher Dronos Drom? Apocrypha stores its secrets and forbidden knowledge in receptacles of all shapes and sizes, while the most common tend to take the form of books and tomes. One can also find scrolls, sheaves of parchment, eyes of Mora, and stone and metal tablets, but perhaps the most intriguing of the various containers, other than the eyes of Mora, are the Glyphics. For those of you unfamiliar with the peculiarities of the Great Eyes realm, I'm sure you are asking yourself, just what in oblivion is a Glyphic? Have no fear, for I will explain the details of these unusual items, as I know them in short order. Like all of Apocrypha, Glyphics are the creation of Hermaeus Mora. Think of them as crystallized memories, condensations of notional moments in time, captured in solid form and stored for later revelation. Every glyphic contains a specific bit of knowledge or a specific memory. With the proper coaxing, they can be urged to transform into a tangible version of the concept contained within. Since glyphics are created specifically by the Great Eye, you can assume that each contains something of significance or importance to Hermaeus Mora. They are among the most secure and tamper-proof vaults of knowledge in all of Apocrypha. Some say the glyphics contain knowledge and memories that the Great Eye has locked away for a reason. Others that he uses them to store information of particular interest to his personal godly pursuits. Regardless, if you ever get a chance to interact with a glyphic, be careful to note whatever knowledge they contain. And that is the final book for today. Thank you for joining me this evening. I will see you next time we read. Take care.